Hello and welcome to the Open Era podcast. My name is not Devang Desai. I am Simon Bushell. Dev is away. Ironically enough, he's in the UK at the moment, enjoying the sights and sounds of London. In the meantime, we did ask Discord extraordinaire, friend of the show, Patreon, Priyanka Dobson to come back. Pri, we love having you on the show, so thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to make the same joke last time about needing an Arsenal fan to round out the crew and bring that requisite melancholy to the podcast.
It was a great season. I still feel a huge level of empathy for you. I am probably in the minority, but I feel like that title race was not choked away. I feel like just the better team won across the season, but lots to be proud of, I would say.
You're just buttering me up when we get started, I imagine.
That's the way to do it in the business, right? Is to be nice to your guests as they come on the show.
I think so.
Maybe one way to bring everything down to size is me asking you off the bat thoughts about Rafael Nadal. He's not there at the tournament during the course of the week. We'll touch on a bunch of the news stories in segment one before touching on the tennis. But Pri, just starting out, Rafa's done for a while. He got exploratory surgery. It doesn't even look like this is surgery to correct anything. They're still trying to figure out what's wrong with him. Your thoughts overall on where the Spaniard is at as a Rafa superfan?
Man, it's been, what is the joke they're making on the internet? Like, hola a todos has become like a trigger from his Instagram captions. It's tough to see. I think what's hard for me as a Rafa fan is like, I feel like we've been playing on house money since like 2017. And that's quite a long time to feel like we're on house money, right? That's 5 years. Like Australian Open 2022 was what's the next level of house money? I'm not a gambler. I don't know. So there's something to feeling like this was inevitable and like feeling really grateful that I got what in my head is extra time. And I almost feel better that he's like set a retirement date. Like I was so sure he was going to retire after Roland Garros last year. Like, do you remember his speech after he won and like he took a big pause and everyone was like, this is it. And it wasn't. And not that he ever really reached those highs again the rest of the year, but I want him to feel good. I want him to be able to walk with his child after he retires. It adds a weird feeling to the tournament. But as like a Rafa fan, I'm like, just feel better. Do whatever makes you feel better, whether it's retiring, whether it's doing exploratory surgeries under the best medical care in the world, you know, whatever gives you the closure that you need on your legendary career, I think would make me feel good as a Rafa fan. Does that sound like a parasocial relationship? It does a little bit.
Just a little, but that's fine. Yeah. We're in multiple parasocial relationships across this podcast, so I don't think I'd hold it against you. It is interesting though, because he sort of looms over this tournament.
I mean, literally with the statue, right? That's as you enter the grounds.
First time in 19 years he's not been at this tournament, a 14-time champion. I know it's silly, the fact that we actually have players out there playing and competing and we have those storylines to touch on and we start with Rafael Nadal, but he's just so outsized to this tournament that it does feel like the correct place to start, given that this is a player who turned 37 during the course of the week. He's certainly not getting any younger. I guess I'll ask you this question. Do you think he's going to play at the French Open again? Do you think he's got one more tournament in him, or do you think he's really done in the way that I do?
I think that will be potentially the clay swing next year may be his goal, to be like, can I give it one more go? Can I do at least as good as Federer in his final Wimbledon? Which I feel like Federer also not being in this tournament, it doesn't loom as large nearly, but what is this, the first tournament since 2004 without either of them?
Yep.
So it definitely feels like a changing of the guard, but I think he would love to go out on his own terms. Like this is a guy who never retires, you know, he didn't retire against Mackie McDonald in the Australian Open, even though he clearly should have. So I feel like he is going to try to give it one more go on his own terms, and like what better place to do it than the place where he has such a legendary sports record. But that could be me just, you know, being really, really optimistic to hope to see him play one more time.
I think that's reasonable, though. I think we all hold out hope to at least seeing him get one more run. I don't know what version of his body we're on at this point. He's turned completely into a cyborg. So he's a modern miracle when it comes to science and medical procedures that I would like to see him at least get one more shot out of this. Let's change gears, and a player that maybe didn't overcome the odds and illness got to her is Wimbledon champion Elena Rybakina. She pulled out of this tournament. She was set to face Sarah Ramos-Toro. This is kind of I think a bit of a shock to a lot of people, just given how well she'd played. And it must have been serious enough that she felt that she did not want to play and put her health at risk, given going into the grass court season and what she's not defending anything there, but she's sort of superficially defending the title, or literally defending the title, even though the points aren't on the line. It sounded like from the write-up that she wasn't doing great, that she was not sleeping, she was really struggling to breathe beforehand. I guess your overall reaction of seeing her pull out and the cavernous hole that this leaves in the drawer, given her form.
Yeah, it was definitely disappointing. And minutes before the match, I feel like we don't hear that anymore. I guess Monfils did like a little bit more last minute, but we're so used to seeing a Badosa withdraw before the tournament even starts, right? That to have it happen right before play, I think just cast a pall over the entire day. And I think I read that she was like dizzy as well. So I wonder if it was, when you hear fever and dizzy and those types of things, these are elite athletes. And if you can't see straight, I can't imagine trying to even get on the court. So hopefully it's something that passes and she can give it another go at Wimbledon and defend her title. But definitely, I think, leaves something to be desired. And I think puts a lot of focus on, not to bring up the match that's in the background for both of us right now, but puts pressure on, a Sabalenka or a Swiatek to really step up.
Love that Paolo Badosa was catching strays in the middle of that in regards to her record.
No, I feel so bad for her. She was just on the runaround and not being able to play a Grand Slam this year. That was out of empathy.
You touched on it as we are sitting here and recording Sunday afternoon. The match between Sloane Stephens and Anya Sabalenka is taking place. The first primetime match of the French Open 2023. This has come very much under the spotlight, being the fact that we've had 10 or 9 night matches in a row that haven't involved female players. Amelie Mauresmo was, I think, very rightfully criticized last year about some of the comments that she made and the way that this has all kind of shook out, especially during the course of this season and this tournament as well. I don't want to throw too much of a grenade to you on this as a topic, but I think I would be curious to hear your opinion overall, because it's not a great look for the sport and it's not a great look for the tournament either.
It's definitely not, especially when the WTA is so, taking a step back, we all want it to be Alcaraz and Djokovic, but given what Alcaraz has done at Roland Garros, not on clay necessarily, he's won titles on clay, what he's done at Roland Garros, like there is also, for me at least, a sense of inevitability that like Novak Djokovic is going to win this tournament unless something miraculous happens, including Alcaraz playing at his highest level when he needs it to be. And thus, as folks on our Discord say all the time, like the WTA is where the action is at. The WTA is where the upsets are, or where folks dramatically raise or lower their level. And even just best of 3, best of 5, that's always a point of contention, right? People are like equal pay for equal play time and tennis per dollar and whatever. But also the randomness that comes with a 3-set best of 3 versus best of 5, like inevitably makes the WTA more exciting. So it just seems like a massive loss to not have them on as night matches. And yeah, maybe you don't sell more concessions because the match doesn't physically go on as long. But I'm glad they're finally taking note after, I think last year there were 0 women's matches at night, right? Like, so it's 100% improvement rate year over year for being data driven and all that. But yeah, it's massively shameful. And especially for Mauresmo, not to be a woman, support women type of woman, but, as a representative of her sport, and representative where she came from, it was particularly disappointing. So I'm glad they're trying to rectify it. But as you said, like it's so late in the week and there were some clear candidates earlier. I feel like it was quite disappointing.
I think that's always the thing that I find frustrating about this discussion in general, which is that the men's matches which have been played in the night session, for the most part, haven't been great. Like there's not been a clear, I would say, hierarchy of how good some of these matches are. And I think regardless of any opinion, just on quality of match alone, there's a case to be made every time for some of these women's matches to be played or getting the spotlight. And that's before you even get into some positions of equity or any of those issues, which, I think is worthy of a discussion. But just on sheer quality alone, some of these matches should clearly have had the spotlight.
Definitely. And, the US Open, it goes so late because they do one women's match and one men's match each night session. But, the fans are willing to stay till 2 a.m. or however long it takes. And any match cannot turn out the way that we think it is. I think we have some upsets that we'll be discussing later that it didn't go the way that people thought they would. So you're always running that risk, right? But if you have 2 matches on there, you increase the chances that both of them are going to be exciting, or at least one of them are going to be exciting. So I'm not saying it even has to be one men's and one women's match. Just put 2 matches on at night. If you as a director are concerned that those sessions, those folks won't feel like they're getting their money's worth. I'm looking at it from a purely capitalist point of view, which is how I feel like most of these directors often do.
Which is understandable, right? Like, I think if you really want to be cold-hearted and take a business, sort of an MBA approach to this, of saying that you really want to have the maximum amount of time that people can be inside of the stadium consuming alcohol and buying stuff and all that kind of stuff, it's kind of understandable. But from every other perspective, I don't agree with it. And a simple solution to that is just put 2 matches on.
Right.
It's a really simple solution here.
And on Chatrier, I believe you can't even bring alcohol into the stadium. So, you'll have to do 2 matches at least to make some money on the grounds or something. I don't know. Or maybe they start letting that happen. That'll make the French crowds even calmer, I imagine. So
just sell weed. Come on, people. There's a nice in-between ground here on everything. Yes. Speaking of it, and you touched on it, the French crowd has not exactly covered itself in glory during the course of this week. There's been some quote-unquote boorish behavior, to hear Dev's voice at the back of my head describing how this is going on. Clownish, I think you could describe some of it as. We can maybe touch on Novak Djokovic in a second, but I thought the really standout of this was seeing Taylor Fritz and seeing his response to large quantities of booing, and also just in general, kind of just shitty behavior. And it kind of is made for an interesting tournament from a crowd perspective.
Yeah, I love people saying Fritz is bringing out his inner Medvedev. And I'm like, who wouldn't react the way that Fritz react? I mean, as someone with incredible, I can't even picture someone who wouldn't have had some semblance of what he did, which I think wasn't even, the big shush moment wasn't even till the very end after he had won, right? And then getting subsequently booed. But I don't know if it's just like post-COVID, even though we're not technically in a post-COVID era, will we ever be? But like crowds everywhere, in my view, have gotten worse. Like everyone's forgotten how to behave outside, let alone tennis fans, not to let them off the hook necessarily. But it's actually been true. It's worse this year, right? We're not making it up.
It's certainly worse this year. I think undoubtedly and maybe in some cases it's just the players that are being involved in this are more high profile and have more spotlight placed upon them. But it's certainly been...
Bush, are you saying Arthur Rinderknecht is the high profile player we're talking about here? No, I could. Respect to him, I suppose. I'll
have no Rinderknecht slander here.
But it's weird to see it go the other way too, right? Because all that to say, like, I think crowds, my point was earlier that I think crowds have been reckless this entire year. I think Australian Open, they also have done some questionable things. But it's weird to also see how much they go in the opposite direction. Like the Monfils match was incredible and the crowd energy there, right? So it's like, do you take the good with the bad or ask for everyone to just be a little bit more timid and or respectful? Obviously, we want to be respectful. That's like the baseline. But there's always been booing. There's always been, Rafa used to get booed here in the very, very beginning. So it's certainly crossed the line. I think this tournament more than others, but I think there's also been some like unexpected, just different energy throughout the entire tournament this year.
When does the line between aggressively supporting someone turn into a problematic crowd? This is one of my more famous things that I always try and come back to on this podcast, which I think is quite funny to think about, is that what is a good crowd? What is a good crowd? I always find this stuff sort of fascinating to dig into.
The booing at the serves, I think, is when it crosses a line for me. And even the cheering when that happens, I think that like breaches some invisible line of tennis etiquette for me. I think good points, anything like that, but like let people serve in peace and then let it go. And obviously there's the baseline table stakes stuff that never flies. But I think that's when, for me, it gets into like, we're getting into rude territory if you're booing people or cheering or when folks are double faulting.
Just because you pay money to get into a ground doesn't mean you can insult people. It doesn't mean you can be abusive to people as well. I think those lines get crossed quite often in this sport. So I'm with you on this.
Yeah, both in person and online. So
it's been an interesting tournament for a number of reasons. Off the court, obviously, we've touched on the crowd, we've touched on some of the other stuff, but we've had 2 fairly prominent players at the top end of the sport who have had, I would say, political involvement during the course of the week. Let's start with Anya Sabalenka, who is now avoiding press conferences at the French Open, to quote, for her own mental health and well-being. She has been challenged numerous times during the course of this tournament by Ukrainian reporters asking her stance on this and on the war of Russia's invasion of Ukraine to try and get her on the record. I think this is a reasonable point to say that she's been fairly wishy-washy in terms of overall her representation on this issue. The transcripts of this make interesting reading as well in terms of how she chose to represent herself and also how aggressively the reporter acted in this scenario. So again, without wanting to bring you on as a guest and throwing a, astonishingly tough question, where did you land on this issue overall? Did you feel like the reporter went across the line, and how do you think Sabalenka handled herself?
This one's tough for me because in thinking of all of the times recently where press conference etiquette has come into question, I realize it's impossible for me to figure out like an ethical framework that is fairly applied to each player. Like how I feel about this situation is inherently going to feel differently than how I felt about the Naomi Osaka situation, because they're both about press conferences, but to me they're inherently different. And I don't feel like I feel like the journalist got close to the line. And from my understanding, wasn't it a Ukrainian journalist, or was that just internet gossip?
It was, yeah.
You can tell even in the way that the Ukrainian players speak, like Svitolina or Kostyuk, like this is obviously an emotional subject for them, right? It's extremely close to home. I would think it would be impossible for this person to not get very, very close to the line. And for Sabalenka, like this is a sport where you represent a flag. I mean, she doesn't now, but she has not only not been wishy-washy, but in the past gestured toward a support of this administration. I think it was naive, I think, for her not to expect this line of questioning at all. Maybe she didn't expect it to the degree that this journalist did it. But I mean, you're number 2 in the world. You have a press team, I imagine. Like, just get prepped on a good response. I know that's not what we want to see in press conferences. We don't want to see overly scripted PR corporate speak. But if I found her use of the word like safe to then now drop out of the press conferences like kind of insulting when we're talking about safety in regards to war and Ukraine. But this is also all coming out of my bias that like I don't love her as like a tennis player, her game alone. So I'm inherently more likely to like not buy her responses versus somebody that I like super love and stand, to use an internet word. I'd be like, they're great, they're doing amazing. That's exactly how they should have reacted. So super long-winded way of saying I don't think the journalist crossed the line. I think Sabalenka, I don't think she handled it the best. I find it very telling that no one else has come out at the full force that they did with Naomi Osaka to be like, why isn't she going to press conferences anymore? Like, I think that's pretty unfair. So, I guess I'm answering your spicy question with a little spice that I feel like she should have to go to conferences and have to answer some of these.
Pretty deafening silence is what I would describe it as in terms of finding players with support of her stance on this one, in terms of being removed from press conferences, and also finding players that have been really supportive of her in general for the way that she's acted around this issue. I think there's no smoke without fire on this one. And I'm aware I'm speaking in generalizations, but to that end, it doesn't feel great. Mm-hmm. I think in tennis, honestly, from the amount of press conferences these guys and girls do and how many tournaments they play and the way that information gets out there, you start to get the sense that this is not a pretty great issue when it comes to Sabalenka in terms of how she's held herself on this one.
100% agree with you, right? Like, where there's smoke, there's fire. You can get a sense of where someone is leaning, like even under, I don't know what it's like, thankfully, to have a family that lives under a dictatorship if she still has relatives in Belarus. I think she herself lives in Florida. So like, I don't know what that's like and what kind of pressure that person might be under, but like other folks from that region have found a way. So like, no one is questioning Victoria Azarenka in the same way, right? Mm-hmm. So like that's got to say something. And, Rublev, folks have written messages on cameras, like Kasatkina, I think, has a reputation for being, there was no real beef between her and Svitolina today, even though they didn't do a traditional handshake, I don't think. So to your point, I think folks kind of know where she sits and they want her to have to say it out loud.
Yeah, some level of accountability, right? Which I think is only fair given the stakes of this as a conflict in general.
It always comes to like sports and politics and even the Djokovic situation of like, when do you want to hear from these athletes? Because there's so many folks, Sabalenka included, who are like, politics don't belong in sport. But also, for me, war is different than politics. Like, no one's asking her to talk about the marginal tax rate, you know? So it's always going to be a bit more emotional when it's something like war versus what people try to brand as politics.
I tell you what, I would love to hear the top 10's opinion on the marginal tax rate. I think it would be utterly hilarious.
I think they would all be on the same page of these as little taxes as possible on all my winnings, please. Thank you. Very short article.
Yep, absolutely. Let's round out the first segment with perhaps, quote unquote, the biggest story of what happened during the course of the week. And again, I'm aware that you're coming on as a guest, and I don't want you to have to field a very challenging question, but or understand the geopolitical ramifications of Kosovo and Serbia. However, Novak Djokovic cannot get out of a news cycle, can he, during the course of this week? First of all, he writes on the camera, Kosovo is the heart of Serbia, stop the violence, in quotations written on the camera. Then he sort of gets into a very, I would say, almost aggressive back and forth with the fans on court during his third round victory. Pri, I don't really know if I have a question for you, other than to say, what on earth is going on inside of Novak Djokovic's brain for this stuff to still be considered to be fine, given all the things that have happened to him over the past 3 years?
I wonder if he thinks he's just floating with a suit of armor of all his Grand Slams and getting in and outs of controversies and defaults and anti-vaccinations and deportation scandals. And he's like, I'm still in the country, so it's just turning out better than last time. And actually, it's funny you say, I was just on holiday in Croatia this past week, so I actually did learn a little bit more about the Balkan region and their history from our lovely transfer driver, Mario. And so I'm not at all going to wade into that at all. But again, it sounds like, these are all emotional issues coming up after a time of like relative peace. So I understand that it's top of people's minds, and not to sanitize it, but Djokovic, like, get a PR guy. Like, if you want to say something, if you want to write something on a camera, I mean, talking about one nation state's rights to exist is a different message than like, no violence, So I don't know. It's, again, not for me to say anything about the actual situation and like what he said or any of that piece. But I think he thinks, A, that he can say whatever he wants at this point in his career. And two, that nothing is going to happen to him. He's like Teflon, He's getting let back in the U.S. this year because the vaccinations have been lifted. Like, he's ostensibly the favorite for this tournament still. He can say whatever he wants.
I certainly get the sense that this is setting up, given all of his actions, a post-tennis career within the political scene. I think you would have to be very naive to believe that he's not heading in that direction, just given his involvement with the PTPA, given his overall stances on the tour, and given his, very overt political leanings in terms of how he's presented himself over the past few years. So it would shock me if we did not see him in some form of prominent position within the political scene in Serbia over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think they call that pulling an Imran Khan.
Indeed. You said it, not me. Right? Indeed so. Let's leave part one. And when we come back after the break, we can touch on some events that have happened on the court. It's been a mammoth tournament so far, some big high-profile losses, some great matches. We'll touch on all of it in part two. See you then. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. Priyanka, so here we go. Let's start with some high-profile losses that have taken place. I want to go down losers first and subsequently give the winners their dues as well. But let's start with perhaps the biggest loss of the whole week, which was Dani Medvedev being dumped out by Thiago Seyboth Wield. I guess the manner of the victory is quite surprising. Maybe seeing Dani Medvedev losing on a clay court so soon after winning a high-profile Masters 1000 is a little surprising, but given his record on this surface and given his overall stance on the record at this tournament, maybe this isn't such a big shock.
I like to think that Medvedev of a year ago would have brushed this off. And actually, he was at the Spanish Grand Prix today in Barcelona. So maybe it's worked out the best for him that I feel like Formula One is always his like parting shot at, not to steal the segment name, but it's always his shot when he like leaves the tournament early. He's like, I was watching the Grand Prix anyway. But that one was I had Medvedev going to the final. So just even for the sake of my bracket, I was disappointed in that one. And especially since his opponent turned out to be not someone you want to root for as well. So it's not even a great like underdog Ben Shelton type of story.
Well, yes, I was going to save this for parting shots, but it did come to attention during the course of the week that potentially there might be some ties to the Seaboth World family and literal Nazis.
Yeah.
It's not a great look across I feel like there needs to be harsher words to describe than not a good look when you're associated with Nazism and fascism in general.
You're right. And I think accusations of abuse as well. But then you see him on the ATP Tour Instagram being like, biggest upset of the week. So I think yet another way that politics, I guess, is not staying out of tennis this week at all. But no, I really thought Medvedev was gonna go far. I think he was gonna ride that momentum all the way to the final. His draw wasn't even so difficult in comparison, right?
No, definitely not. And I think those accusations which have been leveled against Seaboth World have still not been resolved in any capacity. There's still a very huge cloud, I think very credible accusations towards him. So yeah, I mean, like during the course of the week, we said we're going to go onto the court, but it's impossible sometimes at the intersection of politics and this damn sport is that you have someone who's very credibly been accused of domestic violence, effectively given the biggest spotlight of the week, really, in terms of his achievements on court. And it's just, again, a shitty look for the sport. Let's transition. Jannik Sinner lost in a match that he should have won. I don't think anyone is denying that. I think the way that Daniel played in this one was fantastic. I think just seeing his tears at the end of this one, of him sobbing into his hands, the conclusion of this one after winning in 5 sets was really lovely to watch and showed how much it meant to him. Jannik, baby, come on, get this one done. Like, I think you win this 9 times out of 10, but goodness me, he's gonna want that one back.
Oh no, and this becomes like how we keep asking this question of like the Sinner's next gen. I think right is Alcaraz's peer. Like best of 5 just seems so much more difficult for them now that it's not part of the Masters anymore. For them to get that practice, like I don't. That wasn't all of what happened at that match, but that it always inevitably comes up in my mind when they lose these matches that they're supposed to win, is that like best of 3, he absolutely would have won that. And best of 5, the stamina, whether it's mental or physical, I think always seems to give out for him at some inopportune moments.
I think we've seen some real improvements with him during the course of the year. Not only physically does he look a lot bigger and looks a lot more imposing on court.
Yeah.
And the results, I think, have come as well. I think we've seen results this year that have given you immense pause to think, okay, this guy can legitimately be a world number 1 and be a member of that next gen that's going to be competing for Grand Slams for a long time. And then you get results like this and you're like, what the bloody hell is going on, dude? Like, he's still not quite figured it out, has he? And he's still not quite there, but it's coming. I still believe it's close.
You want to hope so. And that's like the thing with all these massive expectations. Like, it feels like he's underperforming and yet he's still so young. I feel like the big 3 is like at least massively shifted everyone's perspective of like success and consistency. Like wherever they all just do well. Like what if this is Djokovic is like 85th major in a row, like past a certain round or something. So that like expectations of consistency are so high, but as evidenced by Medvedev as well, like that's the beauty of the sport is you have to actually close it out. You have to emphatically win the match, and he'll get there. But I always feel like every time he doesn't, it's like a tiny step back in his ability to do so, because it's like his fellow Ginger Rublev. Like you have to do it once and over again and start to believe that you can do it, right? And so I feel like every time he doesn't do it, it's like pulling him backwards away from like that delta of his talent.
Totally, right. And I think we're getting to that threshold where he's sort of on that upwards trajectory. Everyone's like, oh, it's inevitable. It's definitely going to happen. And he's sort of somewhat getting over. We don't know where he is on this graph, where he's sort of leveling out. It's like, wait, is this guy just going to be a number 10 in the world? Is that it?
Right.
That's like, there's nothing to be ashamed of in that. But like when the expectation is world number 1 and you're leveling out at losing in the second round and being, consistently losing in semifinals and finals at matches that you think he should win, it does get a little bit concerning.
Yeah, but it's a bit weird, right? Because of like the COVID protected points situation, like there've only been new number 1s that weren't Andy, Rafa, Roger, Novak. In 2021, 2022, like quite late. So like being a slam winner as a notion of like success for these young players or being number 1, like those have been such unreachable goals for them. So I'm almost like, I'm bringing it back to your original point of like, he has had a solid year. And maybe that's something that we have to all keep in mind when we're thinking about these expectations for a lot of these players, is because number 1 has been so insurmountable. Even winning a slam has been so insurmountable that like, maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay for Altmaier to have gotten this one, gotten his moment in the sun. He's a guy you can root for, unlike the other guy.
Definitely, yeah. Great outfit from Daniel Altmaier as well, and it was nice to see. Talking about a player who's passed it, Coco Gauff. No, come on, just worth a joke here. I only mentioned the past versus the future on this one. Mira Andreeva lost. How on earth did Andreeva not get disqualified from this match? Like that's what I was scratching my head.
I don't know.
Given the ball got launched into the crowd, I believe it hit a fan, right? And there was a long conversation with the chair umpire.
I think so.
Is this at the discretion of the umpire then? Is that how I understand this? Because by the letter of the law, I think she should have been DQ'd.
I think it is. I think I read a lot about this when Djokovic happened in 2021, the default. The default heard around the world. I think potentially a tournament director could have come and overturned the umpire's call. And I think that's what Djokovic was asking for way back in the day, like for someone to come in and overturn it. But I think that for that to happen, it would have to be pretty spectacular. So, and again, I think these tournament directors and umpires, they just want play to go on as much as they can. So even when it's really obvious, they're going to be humans and err on the side of what will give us more tennis, unfortunately.
Given what we saw in the football world during the course of the week, I believe it was Anthony Taylor, right, the referee in the Europa League final, of him leaving Budapest airport and effectively being bombarded by militant fans. I have a lot of empathy for our officials, so sometimes I understand why they go on the side of being a little more conservative on this one, just given how aggressive fans can be towards this as a situation.
Right. And I always wonder how easy it is for folks to be objective with the players that or who's in front of them. Not that Andreeva's 16. It's not like she necessarily has done amazing things just yet, but this was like being billed as this past versus future kind of, or future versus future, as I wanted to say, type of matchup. So my inclination, and this is probably very cynical, is to say, hey, if it happened to a fan, not to a line judge or to somebody on the court, so maybe it's fine and forgivable for them to move on.
I should say, for the record, I am joking, by the way, for the past versus the future, in case you can't tell. Coco Gauff is not past it, shockingly enough. Being world number 1 in doubles and like world number 3 in singles is not making you past it at all. What do you think? Thoughts on the match
Appreciate
overall?
the clarification.
Absolutely.
So go ahead.
Thoughts on the match overall from your perspective? Because I thought it was fascinating. Mira Andreeva did not look out of her league at all. I think she had shots of winning this match as well.
Right.
And I think if we're looking and circling her name in the future, there is a really, really bright future in general, because she looked the part massively. She looked like a Grand Slam champion. That's what she looked like.
Yeah, she looked incredible. It almost reminded me, this is not exactly analogous, but I think the Diana Schneider match against Maria Sakkari at the Australian Open, where there were, Andreeva did this at a more consistent level, with flashes of just like absolutely great tennis. And like, I would love to see more of this matchup in the future, but I think a Grand Slam this is the most base analysis in all of tennis. Like a Grand Slam is just a different stage. So even if for women, it's best of 3 all the time, I think the mental stamina to keep going is just something you have to get with practice. Does me, who has never played in a Grand Slam match.
But this is why we watch the sport, right? Become
exactly.
Armchair critics of the whole thing.
Exactly.
So Jess Pegula lost to Elise Mertens. I think most onlookers, most observers of the sport did not have Jess Pegula going deep into this tournament. I will admit, given her first round win and the way that she played, I was starting to get a little nervous of how aggressively I came out and saying that she wouldn't make the second week of this tournament. She didn't make the second week of the tournament. I think more down to her opponent than maybe her, because I thought Elise Mertens played fantastic in this match.
Agreed. And I feel like Mertens is that player like a Kaya Kanepi you just don't want to see in a draw at any point. You don't want to see her at a first round. You don't want to see her at a fourth round, because she's always capable of just having that consistent level to untwist your game. And I feel like that's maybe what she did to someone, Pegula, who's known for being super consistent. And so it's like consistency meets consistency, like rock in a hard place. Who's going to get out?
It's true. It is true. We touched on him earlier in the podcast, Taylor Fritz, he of the shush. He's out of this tournament in, I think, somewhat surprising fashion. Although, given the year that Francisco Cerundolo has had, sneakily up to 24 in the world, the 23rd seed here, is a very, very good clay court player. Is this a surprising loss, do you think?
It's not. Not to throw shade on, I think, the top-ranked American player, but I mean, this man lost to a visibly injured Rafael Nadal at the Wimbledon semifinals. That's exactly what I am doing. I'm throwing tons of shade there. So to me, Fritz is like, can lose on any day or can win a Grand Slam on any day. It just, whatever version of him shows up and whatever version of his opponent shows. I realize I'm just describing tennis, I guess, with that description. But all that to say, Fritz to me is never someone I put going far in my brackets. So when he goes far, he's out kicking his coverage, in my opinion.
Love it. Always down for some Taylor Fritz slander on this podcast. It makes Dev so angry. So happy to hear that.
He let me down in some of my, I've drafted him in previous open air drafts, so I must be biased by his underperformance in those on my team.
Speaking of people who have let us down in previous drafts, Bianca Andreescu lost, and this one has sort of some political ramifications. Tarasenko, of course, is Ukrainian, is on the record of this week saying that a decent percentage of her winnings is going back towards the country of Ukraine, and just her overall stance of trying to continue to play in order to win the most amount of prize money to send back to her native country. I mean, Jesus Christ, think about the pressure that comes with that. On the flip side of this was a utter stinker of a loss from Bianca Andreescu. She was terrible. Her first serve percentage was like 35% during the course of this match.
Yeah.
What on earth is going wrong, or what's going on in the mind of Bianca Andreescu at the moment?
Her ankle injury seemed so intense that I was surprised that she was back at a level to beat Victoria Azarenka in the first round in the manner that she did. This is my misunderstanding of, ligaments and how all of that works. But man, she really just fell apart. Like 6-1, 6-1 is not the level that we're expecting to see from her really ever in a Grand Slam, right? And especially in a third round. Yeah,
no kidding. Let's close out this segment of results that have happened on the court. Elena Svitolina beat Daryna Katsukina in a match that had some strange non-handshake, a thumbs up indeed. Katsukina, I think, one of the really, genuinely lovely people on tour. I don't think anyone really has a bad word to say against her. There's a bunch of stuff that we can unpack in here. Elena Svitolina returning first Grand Slam since becoming a mother. Someone who has also a very flimsy record at the back end of tournaments and has perhaps flattered to deceive in getting over the line of a player of immense talent and stature. I don't know what we want to pick out of this one other than to say I think Svitolina's looking really good. I think she's looking in a position where, given the draw that she has and the way that she's played, she continues to make inroads here. I've been really surprised, and delighted by how well she's done. I think she said very nicely on the court that it was nice to feel the support that Gael always gets at Chatrier. So that was, or Longlen, I think she was on rather. So I think that was just nice to see that as well. But yeah, she's looking that second set where, she wobbled a bit and was able to pull it out in the tiebreak. That's pretty vintage stuff from her. As someone who will flail between semis and crashing out in the second round, and just always very encouraging to see moms come back on tour and feel that they can compete at the highest level. That type of representation I'm always here for.
And not to bring up the discourse, as some of our Discord friends call it, but it does set up now as we are seeing Sabalenka just won her match. It sets up quite the discourse heavy next round for her as well.
Come on, you got to make this the night session. Surely.
Yeah.
Honest to goodness. Talk about drama and talk about storylines. And also talk about two immense tennis players as well. Let's not forget that.
Yeah, I'm hoping they do the right thing there, just in terms of everything swirling around it. You never hope for geopolitical tension to be a thing that exists, but if you're going to try to leverage it for eyeballs, that's a way to do it.
I'd love to have seen the ESPN package that they present for this one ahead of the match. If, of course, ESPN actually cared about this tournament or is involved in it anymore. So, whatever. It's
NBC Sports who's having McEnroe on there, who, as you can imagine, is having very, very nuanced discussions about all the geopolitical things that are going on. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a clunky one.
How dare you? That's the commissioner of tennis that you're slandering here. Unbelievable. I think rightfully so.
Yes, he loves to read The Economist and keep up with what's
He does indeed. He has a subscription to the New Statesman. Okay, that wraps up part 2. When we come back, it's time for parting shots. There's been a bunch of other stuff that we haven't managed to cover yet. We'll cover all of that. We'll see you in a second. Welcome back to the show. Priyanka, it's time for parting shots. Let's open this with a wishing of happy Pride Month to everyone involved. It's always entertaining to see how different corporate brands or associations try and associate themselves with Pride Month. And the WTA and ATP are no difference, although something which did catch my eye during the course of this week, the WTA has a standalone page. They have a giant pride flag emblazoned all across the front of their page, of the homepage of the WTA site. Absolute crickets from the ATP. Nothing to be found anywhere. Am I reading too much into this, or is this just perhaps a tour that has historically been much more socially active in the WTA sense, just continuing that activism here?
Yeah, I mean, the WTA has always had LGBTQ, not always, but has had the fortune of having ambassadors like Billie Jean King and Martina Navratilova. I mean, Dasha Kasatkina they've had folks to be ambassador. Unfortunately, in these cases, you have to have folks from the community sometimes push for this type of representation. And the ATP doesn't have that. And for me, I wonder how much that plays into it, that there's no spokesman or steward to be like, this is something we need to highlight and address and show our support for. Especially with the current state of the world, it's very top of mind in the U.S. at least. But all that to say, that's always what I wonder when it comes to this type of stuff, is that the WTA has always had these ambassadors and the ATP doesn't. So who is speaking for those people in that community and in that tour to make this a priority?
I think in general, the fact that they have just done nothing on the ATP side, you couldn't at least come out with an article or a write-up of why pride is important for everyone to understand from a tennis perspective.
Right.
It just looks a bit shit, to be honest.
And like, considering the bare minimum some corporations do, or even some leagues, like I think in Formula One, like some of the drivers were just wearing bracelets. And like, I don't think there was much else to it, but it was still some show of something. So the bar is for them is in the floor. So I totally agree with you that there's absolutely more they could be doing. And even that would probably be like, what are you doing with these bracelets? Like say they were to do that, right? But it would be something. Like doing nothing in the year of our Lord 2023 is pretty shameful.
Congratulations, ATP. You have not overcome the floor barrier that you have set up for yourselves.
Yeah, like you're doing worse than Target, So I don't know. That's a tough place to be.
We mentioned in part 2 that Mira Andreeva was not DQ'd. A pair that was DQ'd was Alida Sajadi and Miyu Kato in their doubles match. This one did involve a lines judge. The lines judge was visibly distressed, was in tears on court. So it does happen, right? In the space of back-to-back days of seeing a fan being hit by a ball and the player not being suspended, and then seeing a line judge being hit and being suspended. I'm not someone who's out there calling for consistency on this one. I just think it is interesting to have two events happen so close back-to-back and one set of players get suspended and the other doesn't.
And when it sounds like in the doubles match, their opponents, Buskova and Sorribes Tormo, like called attention to the distress of the line judge and to the fact that the person was still very upset. And I wonder if that also has something to do with it. Although like Coco Gauff would be like crucified if she was like, hey, umpire, please DQ my opponent. So again, like the individual nuances and dynamics of every match, I feel like always plays into it. But once again, incredibly consistent rulings over here.
Love it so much. We have seen during the course of the last few months the WTA stance on China and playing in China since the disappearance and allegations made by Peng Shuai. I wanted to pull this article up because Tumani Karyol wrote during the course of the week in regards to effectively the influence of money and effectively the fact that the WTA is struggling, I think, to find consistent fundraising approaches, despite all of the things that we've seen in terms of, I think, some fairly high-profile amounts of cash being injected into the sport. There's a very, I think, damning article written in direction of both the WTA and Steve Simon in regards to their stance on China and how it's kind of starting to look, if you want to look at this a certain way, like it might have been a good PR move and they didn't really have anything behind it. I wonder if you think that's maybe too cynical an approach, but in general, it's starting to look like more and more we're going to be going back to China and all of this is being swept unceremoniously under the rug.
Unfortunately, that's the way it's looking. And I don't know that it's too cynical when like sports around the world have shown us how much money talks in the last couple of years. Like my first time guesting on this podcast was around when the Peng Shuai story was breaking. So, and it's been a minute, since then we've had, not to let the WTA off the hook or not make this about the WTA at all, but we've had a World Cup take place in a questionable country. We have Saudi Arabian soccer teams, football teams, paying millions and millions for the biggest stars in the world to come there. Like it's not cynical because the message we're seeing around the sporting world is that money talks. Ultimately. And the fact that the WTA did anything at all is like a small credit to them. Are they going to keep, if they need the money, what are they going to stop? Are they going to run out of money? And that's when I'm like, be clear about your finances. Or if it is about the money, you just say that and say, we really want to continue to support our athletes, but at the same time, like fund women's sports and then we can stay out of China. That would be the honest thing to do, but that also is not a great, that doesn't look nice on an article on a website.
It does not. Blame capitalism, I think, is or blame a version of market-led neoliberal capitalism if you're looking for really a cause of this to be upset about.
Right.
Although we do try and, I think there's a thing, right? Like we live in this version of a world, and I think we want these organizations to do slightly better, especially when we talk about off the hop. The WTA does have a strong history of activism and taking moral stances on it to then see, I think, this sort of fizzle out and really just not look great in general. It's kind of upsetting, I think.
Especially because when you're taking a really cynical read on it, right? Like they pulled out of China. China was also not letting events take place because of their COVID protocols, right? So it was easy to make that stance and actually go through with it with actually fewer consequences than maybe we thought up front. So like the really cynical read on that is that plays right into your PR theory over there.
Yeah, I do encourage everyone to check out the article written by Tumani Karyol. I think it's excellent. And I think we will continue to watch this space because this one's starting to look a bit more icky as the time goes on, to use that. Use the terminology like I'm a 9-year-old, but it's not looking great.
Sometimes it's the best word. Sometimes it's the most apt word.
So Radas herself has split with another coach, Emma Raducanu has split with another coach. Sebastian Sachs has parted ways and left the camp. Quote Raducanu, "I have really enjoyed Seb's coaching and working with him. It's unfortunate that circumstances made it unforeseeable for both of us to continue right now, and we have decided to part ways. I wish Seb all the best moving forwards." At this point, who has not coached Emma Raducanu on tour? That's too harsh. It is an interesting one as well, though, just to dive into, to have this many coaches in such a short space of time. What's going on, do you think?
So this specific split I read as like her injury is probably going to be long for her to recover from. And maybe this guy had other opportunities or wasn't willing to see her through that. I think that is totally possible. But as for the prior pieces, she's such a unique edge case, right? And as she always says, like, you guys can make fun of me all you want, but like, I still have a Grand Slam, and I know a lot of you don't. But I wonder if she's just never known, like, her one data sample of success was so unique that she's like, I don't need to replicate that because that was a flash in the pan. So I don't know how to replicate that also. So let me just go and try all the coaches and all the land and see who can get me there as fast as possible. I think that's the thing that I keep kind of reading into it, is like, she wants to get back, or folks want her to get back to that specific level, which was such a flash in the pan and such a not victim of her circumstances, like, because it was just the circumstances of the draw, right? That I wonder if she's like, each coach is not maybe like sufficient enough or fast enough to get her back to that level, versus suggesting, I think what we all think is like, just get fit and like do your time on the tour. And because that always is going to help raise your general level, no?
Yeah, just get back, get healthy, play matches, take your licks, like learn how to be a pro and all those kind of things, and it'll take care of itself. Like, I think she's still a remarkably talented young woman. So there's nothing, I don't think, any to be worried about other than just like leave her alone for a while. That's kind of how it looks to me, at least.
I mean, thankfully she's stayed out of Mouratoglou's clutches, but like
coming.
These are some, I don't know. These are some workhorse coaches. They aren't necessarily like celebrity coaches or anything like that. But I think you always wonder all the dynamics and intricacies of that. Like, does she want someone who could stick with her for the long term, or has that celebrity cachet, but that person can't commit to her, or something like that, and she's just going into more of these like mid-tier is not meant to be like a pejorative term, but like more of these workhorse coaches who are maybe telling her to do it a certain way, and maybe that's not the way she wants to do it.
Fair enough, right? Absolutely fair enough. Live your life. You've won a Grand Slam. You've already won enough money to retire. Like, just like be you, I think.
I know. I feel like she should go to business school and have the best fun fact at all her corporate meetings from now on. Just retire. You've reached the nadir of the sport, and like, just, go do your thing.
I know this is going to sound ridiculous. I think she should just take a few years away from it as well. Like, if you don't feel the fire and the energy and all that sort of stuff,
right.
Like, I think it's completely legitimate to just go and do something else for a while. Like, you're not going to be any different at the age of 24 than you are at 19. Like, your body's still going to be there. You're still going to have all the things to win a Grand Slam. So I don't know. I think there's probably some merit in doing that as well. Right.
Because I can't imagine reaching the pinnacle of the sport at the time of her career that she did. So she's probably like, what is next from here, when, I had other plans to go backpacking next summer. I don't know. So, no, I think that would be good for her.
It must be one of the hardest things in the sport as well. I mean, Dominic Thiem is an example of this one as well. Someone who had to really overcome everything. The three greatest players who have ever played the sport had to overcome all of them to win just one Grand Slam. And the physical and mental toll that it took to get to that point of having to just throw everything into this thing and then just having to reevaluate. Like, I've done the thing that I wanted to do so badly. What on earth comes next? And I think like we lose sight of that in watching someone like Carlos Alcaraz, who did it so early and it's like, oh no, I'm just going to win everything.
Right.
No, my next goals are just to win everything under the sun. It's like, whoa, like that's not easy for a lot of people to do.
Right. And like Rader's journey was much more charmed than Thiem's in that way. Like, Thiem's had to go to all these finals and grind it out and win his first one with no crowd in the worst match ever, final ever. And she did it, in the span of 2 weeks, where she had her plane, she kept having to move her flight. And like, but at the end of the day, like you said, both of them probably the next morning woke up and was like, what now? So I don't know. I hope she finds her peace, whether that's on the court or off the court. But it doesn't seem like she's found it, after that. Yeah, find your peace. That's good words in general. Let's change gears here. Denis Shapovalov is out of the French Open, but not before the ATP website did a piece with him asking questions about what he ate during the course of his week and how he approached matches. This man does not want to eat vegetables. I think this is the one thing that I found astonishing. You're a high-level athlete. How do you not want to eat vegetables? I just don't understand how you get to this position and is trying to, at all costs, avoid having any fruits or vegetables in his life. But doesn't this track with how he also like just perpetually seems 17?
This is true, yes.
You know, like, so as he probably didn't want to eat vegetables then, he's other than his like great op-ed about equal pay, which like I do have to give him shout outs for, like in my mind, he is still not aged since then. So I feel like that genuinely tracked to me in some way.
It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I love carbs, so I got him in that sense, but I don't know what fitness coach of his he's paying that lets him do this and not eat anything that's good for him.
Shapo is 24 now. I still think about him as an 18-year-old.
Right?
I think that's the thing, that we still think about him as this kind of young, up-and-coming player, and he's very much in sort of the median age of the top 100 at the moment, at 24 to 26 age.
Shapo, drop that skincare routine, man, because like I definitely still think of you as that same age of when you broke out into the scene. I also love content like this. Like I would watch so much more of this like silly get to know the players BS. Like I want to see what everyone's eating, except Djokovic, but like I want to see what everyone's routine is. Like drop your skincare routine, drop your get ready with me, drop your bedtime. Like I love all of it. I love seeing the players as people.
I love it so much. I feel like some of that stuff, they're missing out on a trick by not showing it more on the television broadcast in front of more fans. Like this is a very simple way just to find people, to get to know people very quickly, is to find a level of humanizing them in a way that so they're not robots just walking out onto the center of a court.
I know, it's like those Tennis Channel What's in My Bag checks where they record 3 of them and play them for the next 3 years. Like maybe record 6 or 7 of them, you know, give us a little bit more.
Stop giving them ideas. We need to save this for the open era agency.
Yeah, true. I take it back.
Let's talk about Sara Sorobos Tormo. She had a long-form article written by Courtney Wynn on the WTA Tour website during the course of the week. It's been a long road back for SST. Cracked ribs last year. Not a good look for a tennis player and not a good injury to have. I think she also suffered not just from the physical side of it, but of the mental strain of having to come back from this. And I think losing a little bit of love for the sport in the process. Someone who is, I think, beloved as well. I think she's got a lot of fans on tour and a lot of people who really enjoy watching her play. I really enjoyed this as an article and would encourage anyone to check it out because she just seems like a really interesting person.
Yeah, agreed. I love seeing the behind the scenes of this. There's a novel version of kind of the story. Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's not a great book, but it does some of this similar, what she talks about in this article of trying to figure out who you are without the sport, and like good for her for being able to come back and like put her on Breakpoint. She seems really interesting. And the current crop well, maybe don't, because she's already cursed enough and we don't want to extend it to anybody else. But no, I really enjoyed kind of learning a little bit more about her.
All right, let's close out parting shots with the fashion section. Is that what we're calling it? I need to come up with a good catchy name for it. My Sets in the City one for like gossip was fine, but I couldn't come up with anything for fashion. So Wesley Koolhof, I believe still number 1 in doubles. Have you seen this outfit? This is I'm on record. I'm not a huge fan of some outlandish patterns. I love this outfit. I think it's really, really fun. Do you agree?
We're talking about the stripes, right?
The stripes, yeah.
Yes. No, I love it. I love a graphic look, especially with all of the like weird, like psychedelic patterns that like Nike has been putting out and like inopportune places on players' bodies. Like I feel like a graphic like look is coming back. It's like very of this era of like sans serif fonts, you know, and clean lines. No, I'm into it. I'm into it as well.
Speaking of someone who was in I was in a Value Village boutique the other day, which was entertaining to walk around. A lot of graphic t-shirts in there and a lot of like psychedelic patterns. I was like, the age of 34, can I still do this? Can I lean into this?
I think so.
You can, right?
Yeah.
I think it's totally fine.
Yeah.
That being said, I think I might buy this t-shirt. The one that Koolhof has.
I would support that. I wish more players were wearing. Get Carlos Alcaraz out of his weird like green patterny thing and put him in this. It would look way better.
Did you see some of the discords around Nike's clothing during the course of the week? A lot of people on record saying that this is their best tournament in a long time. And I couldn't be any further from that as an opinion. I thought some of this was kind of rubbish, to be honest.
I think both things can be true. It's Schrodinger's Nike box. They were on such a shit run for so long that I think, what was our theory? That they were trying to like offload their tennis athletes and their tennis contracts by being like, we're just going to put out crap season after season so we can offload these contracts. And then this one, maybe they decided that the contracts were worth keeping because it is better, but it's still really not good. Like Lacoste is showing them up, right? So I think both things are true.
When Lacoste is showing you up, it's not a good sign. It's not a good look in general.
No, they're because all of their shirts to me look like office barbecue shirts. So
it definitely looks like the kind of thing that someone from a Fortune 500 company would wear to a squash tournament.
Yeah. I also think I've been watching too much Succession. So I keep imagining all these players in corporate settings, like Emma Raducanu in business school and like Novak Djokovic at the corporate retreat. So that might be bleeding into a little bit of my runway analysis here. And maybe that's the name of this section, the runway.
Oh, very good. Very good. We'll trademark it here and make sure it comes back and makes another appearance.
Perfect.
Do you have anything for 2 challenges remaining? I didn't prep you for this one, but do you have anything non-tennis related that you wanted to shout out as we round out parting shots? I
mean, the most incredible basic recommendation is probably Succession if you haven't watched the little show that could. But no, being on holiday, I actually was able to finish some books, including, so this is almost like a double recommendation. If you've watched the Apple TV show Slow Horses.
I've never seen this. I've never even heard of this.
Oh, so that's the thing with Apple TV shows. They have great shows that no one has heard of. It's about like a British intelligence service, and they're like most ramshackle agents that get like shunted off to this slow house, it's called, like for all the misfits and broken toys. And it's a really great show. It's got Gary Oldman, it's got Jack Loudon, Kristen Scott Thomas. So like, I really recommend it. But also the novels that they're based on, great like vacation books, like solid mysteries. Everything is like fun to read, moves very fast. So I would both recommend the novels by Mick Herron and also the show on Apple TV Plus, Slow Horses.
Consistent reminder that I should probably take a vacation at some point. I haven't taken one yet this year, so might be a good idea.
Oh, I recommend. Big recommend.
Have you seen this video floating around? No worries if you haven't, but Gary Neville, the pundit, was referring to vacations as mini retirements. It was hilarious to watch him. It's like he's never heard of a vacation, so he kept referring to it as a mini retirement. For goodness sake.
Is he American? Because we have a particularly poor record against holiday. I met up with my aunt in Croatia who was like, oh, it's my 15th night in Croatia. I was like, oh man, that hurts. That hurts. She gets 60 days of holiday. So
60 days? Goodness me.
It's fantastic.
Oof, I would pay for that. That sounds good.
Yeah, that's a mini retirement.
That definitely is a mini retirement. Absolutely. Bree, thank you so much for coming on the show. We always love having you here. I know the Open Era fans and listeners always love having you on as well. So we always greatly appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me. And hopefully week 2 of the tournament is as much fun. And maybe less politics, less drama. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, we say that every week and it seems to come back and bite us in the ass. So who knows?
Yeah, I know, right?
Thanks again. You can follow the show on Twitter at Open Era Pod. You can find us on Patreon at Open Era, $3 a month. You get access to the best damn Discord in the world. We refer to it a few times. It's good fun during Grand Slam weeks. I have such a good time chatting with some very knowledgeable and really, really nice people on there. A rating review is also appreciated on your podcast platform of choice. It's again, always greatly, greatly appreciated. For Kevin, producer, and for Priyanka, I'm Simon. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.